All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today, I want to talk to you guys about the boomer blindness and the generational pursuit of happiness. So, as you can tell, based on the title, today I want to get into a conversation about the baby boomers, the famous and infamous, my gosh, can't even speak today. May have a bit of a trouble today, ladies and gentlemen. But the infamous boomers and their societal consequences. And so I really didn't know. I had this interest. I wanted to get in this topic. I've been thinking about it, about baby boomers and the generational different dispositions we have towards institutional authority. And so it got me thinking. I'm raised by some lovely baby boomers. So today's discussion is not going to be, for some of you who have a deep down animosity, who are hoping that I would just yell and rant and rave at baby boomers. That's not necessarily what we're going to be doing today. We are going to be getting deep into the history of their generation and what maybe spawned some of the characteristics that we are so noted that they're so noted by in regards to the counterculture, the first TV generation, dramatic increase in college attendance, again, soap operas. This is going to come in interestingly. Why do we call soap operas soap operas? Well, maybe that's because soap and detergent companies had something to do with creating programming on television as a way to advertise their products. So they were the first generation that was really tied to the whole soap opera stuff. We're going to be looking at global rock stars, the Ed Sullivan Show, and the Beatles. How does that, as the Beatles and Elvis being these global superstars, how does that relate to, again, what we're seeing with Justin Bieber and Cardi B and entertainment in general? That one of the things, as I got deeper and deeper and deeper in today's research, is that we're all boomers. That my biggest takeaway was that based on everything that I saw in my studies of today's topic, is that all of the ripple effects, all the consequences are present in our generation. They're present in the X, they're present in the Millennials, they're present in the Gen Z. And even the political split in this country, that tear in the social fabric, many sociologists, many scholars would point back to the 1960s counterculture. So when we look at the political strife in the country today and the immense widening of beliefs, of camps in regards to American politics, we can't help but go and point back to the 1960s. That, in fact, the 1960s represent much of what we're living through. Even when I get into a little bit of a conversation in regards to second wave feminism, some of the language about heteronormativity, the promotion of homosexuality, gender-inclusive language, well, this stuff isn't new. This stuff goes back to the boomers in the 60s. And so I kept thinking then, what spawned today's conversation, I was thinking about the boomers that I know and how, even if they were Trump supporters, even if they're Republican or they're GOP, the inability to decipher the neocons, the inability to really see the same thing that the younger generations are seeing. Again, we grow up in a different context. Us being millennials, we don't have the advantage of assuming that the whole entire structure of the institutions in the Western world, in America, in corporate America, whatever, the universities, our government, we know that the institutions are not on our side. We know that there's something, whether you're left or right? Whether you're an Antifa or you're, I don't know, America First Patriot, whatever, that both generations see that the institution is the problem, but boomers don't see that same thing. Boomers think they can vote their way out of it. Boomers think they can go ahead, just depend on the market for the 401k, for the retirement. And hopefully that is true. Again, most of our parents are probably boomers. So I wanted to get the point of then me diving into the research. Is like I wanted to figure out what are some of these major differences in the way that we understand the world between us as millennials. I'm a millennial. I assume most of you guys are probably Gen Z or millennials, some Gen Xers, some boomers probably watching. And I couldn't help but think, again, the TV being the central catalyst. And I want to highlight, we've talked about Marshall McLuhan, and what are some of the societal and personal effects of television watching? Well, we've talked about, and I'm going to play just a few clips. Again, this stream isn't about Marshall McLuhan, but I do have some very poignant things that he has to say. Regarding television, that the depersonaling of television, that he talked about how television bringing in a new set of sensory ratios, auditory, moving man back to a tribal state. This is the electronic age in his theory of the medium is the message, that they were inundated with the TV. First the black and white television, then it becomes the colored television. But that introduction to the consumption of information was tied to also a believing the institution. They believed the broadcasters. They believed, Cronkite. They believed the people on the news. And generally speaking, they were all on the same page. Meaning, I don't think the political split in the country didn't exist at that time. And so as we talk about the soap operas then romantic programming directed towards women, directed towards housewives, was created by companies to sell their products to women. But inside the soap operas, they deliberately pushed always a progressive social agenda. And so the boomers then grew up with programming directed towards women to move them towards progressive ideologies. That the way they consume information, they can't help but believe in the institution, whether it be America as the greatest country in the world, the military, right? It's very common. And my dad was a military guy. I'm very fortunate. I feel very thankful that my dad is more of both parents are boomers. Just the disposition. My dad's much more of the sort of silent generation than the boomer, even though he is a boomer. And the different attitudes towards the nation, the different attitudes towards suffering in general. And so the main point, as you hit in the title of today's stream, is happiness. I think that when we look at the greatest generation, we look at the silent generation, then we look at the baby boomers, the biggest thing that I noticed was the productivity and the flourishment. I mean, the 1950s, post-World War II society was one of the most prosperous times in American history. And so the boomers grew up in the most prosperous times by people that went under the most intense suffering, right? The Great Depression and World War II. So their parents both lived through those different aspects. And yet they then were given what every parent wants for their children, right? You want your children to be off better than you are, that the parents then set the boomers to pursue their happiness, right? What does this country say? That somehow we valorize people to go out and pursue their happiness. And I think as a generation, generally speaking, they did do that. And as a generation, so when we look at the TV and how that alters the consumption and consumerism, the financial opportunities that boomers were able to grow up in, right? Very, very different than millennials. Very different than millennials or Gen Z. We only dream of the financial opportunities that the boomers had when they graduated high school, when they graduated college, or whatever they did. And back then, you didn't have to go to college to get a great paying job. And back then, the inflation wasn't as high, so a single man could raise his family. And so interestingly, much of what we talk about on this channel, the rural living, the traditional living, the stay-at-home housewife, the Christian values, building your family. Interestingly, I think that the boomers were the first generation to move away from these ideals, even though they did have considerable amount, it's not as large. I can't make these large generalities because, again, multiple boomers still had nuclear families. Many boomers still had multiple children. So it's not, we have to be very careful with these large general swaths in our conversation today. But when we look at what we wanted, or what we want now, really, as millennials, as Gen Zers, seeing the world in its current state, it was the boomers that actually pursued the interest to move society away from all those things. And so that's what we're going to get into today. I have a really interesting article from the Pew Research Center. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with Pew. They're kind of the head think tank for statistical data in the country. And they have an interesting piece on the baby boomers being the most disgruntled group of all generations. According to research from generations previous to current generations, so the millennials and the Zers, all of which have a higher description of their life, a more hopeful, more optimistic framework. Yet the boomers, who had the most, who have the most resources, who had the houses, who had the jobs, the 9-to-5 careers, somehow they're the ones out of all the generations that exist in America right now, they're the most unhappy generation. And I can't think that, again, it's tied to the pursuit of happiness. They've been sold a lie. And the pursuit of happiness ultimately blinds us, because Christ asks us to take up our cross and follow him. And of which I'm going to read this verse once we get the stream started. Of course, we always got to do our housekeeping. So this is still the introduction. But Christ asks us to carry our cross, to follow him, to bear a burden, to suffer, because Christ suffers. This is what Christians are called to do. I mean, of course, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because I talk about suffering. It's not like I'm going to go live an ascetic life in a grass hut outside. You know, I still am trying to live a nice life. I'm still trying to make money. I'm still trying to have that family. But the general conception of a life, what are we to do with it? Mine is to kind of fill the role, and I think many of us, it's to become the Christian men and women that we are called to do, to really continue our ancestral tradition, to continue God's will for man. And that isn't necessarily the pursuit of happiness. Not that happiness doesn't occur in the pursuit of God's will or these larger purposes or just traditional values. I think you do get happy from that. But the idea of happiness as something to be sold, I think, as a commodity, is tied to the first generation that's raised with the television, and how the television then re-altered. I mean, they grew up, and we all are then affected by this. All of us, our sense ratios have all been affected. I mean, we're watching this on a computer, on your smartphone, wherever, on a smart TV, who knows? But as we talk about the boomers, we also have to realize how much we're also talking about ourselves. And that, I think, is maybe where we can take a little step further in the conversation about the boomers, where the boomers aren't just some dummy out there for us to like beat, right? And blame the boomers for everything. The economic failures of this country, boomers' fault. The drastic transition in cultural values, the boomers' fault. Agreed. The political taking out the manufacturing of this country. At the same time, again, we want to say it's the boomers' fault. At the same time we say that, we also, to each other, recognize that voting doesn't matter, that the globalists have been planning this for 100 years, that the Great Reset, that the destruction of America, that all this has been planned out by the elites. And so, at the same time, we can fault the boomers for some of it. When we talk to each other, then we point the finger at the global elites, this larger. So how much can we actually point the finger at the boomers? Because they're in the same place we are. I mean, did you stop the fraudulent elections that may or may not have occurred in 2020? Did you stop it? I mean, so in history, if somebody was to look back and say, well, where were the millennials? Where were the Gen Xers? Why didn't they stop what was happening? So I think this may help give us a little bit perspective in our discussion. And then I want to talk about the cultural transitions, the legalization of divorce, and how the pursuit of happiness actually leads into other things that we wouldn't necessarily think about. For example, the high rates of divorce. Because marriage itself, and this is a shout out to John Pro Art. So John Proby, go hire him for an icon. He had been talking about, and got me on Kevin Samuels. He's sort of a black podcast show host talking about men and women's relationships, mostly geared towards the black community and stuff. But the black woman in that case, in that scenario, really represents then just the Western woman, generally speaking, who's been inundated with all the propaganda. And he talks about how 80% of the time the women leave, that all divorces within the black community are actually filed by women. And then when they give the reasons for why they filed, hey, John, I just actually gave you a shout out talking about Kevin Samuels. But he talks about how black women actually filed divorce 80% of the time. What for? That they deserve more. It always comes back to the concept of happiness. Happiness. And so because people are pursuing happiness, marriages are absolutely failing, because where in the oath that you take to another person is happiness mentioned? It's not, because marriage, agreeing with Kevin, it is a duty. These are duties. These are oaths you're taking for a lifetime. And then, therefore, it's the pursuit of meaning. It's the pursuit of something that goes beyond happiness that actually gives us more happiness. And that's where the baby boomers went away from. They went away from the suffering, from the more difficult path that actually gives us more meaning, for the commodities, the things that are presented to us. And that led to a slow degradation. Well, actually, I would say a pretty fast degradation of our cultural values in society. And just within, I'm a millennial, so within 2 generations, we live in an entirely different country. So yeah, that is what we're going to be getting into today. That is our introduction. So wanted to throw that out there. Hope everybody is doing well, and blessed Holy Week to all my Orthodox brothers and sisters out there. Want to give a shout out to you. I know that some of you probably went to Matins tonight, so God bless you and your families. I hope you guys are enjoying a lovely, lovely 2021 Holy Week, because obviously that was taken from us last year. So again, hope you all are enjoying it. First thing I want to say is thank you very, very, very much to all the people who signed up over at the website. If you like what we're doing over on this YouTube channel and you would like to support, which again I would greatly, greatly appreciate, please go over to my website and become a website member for exclusive video content. It is for $5 a month, and it's a great way to help me if you would prefer to. It's a great way to support the stream, and you get access to exclusive content. I also want to give a special shout out because we've been having some incredible one-on-one sessions, and we've had a few people sign up since the last stream, so thank you all so much. But we're having a ton of fun talking about really anything. I mean, we have one-on-one sessions where people will send me a video they want debunked, or an idea, or they want to learn more about theodicy and sort of the what's our concepts of evil. Do we live in a dualistic world, or philosophy, or East Asian traditions? Shout out Falco. We'll be talking Friday. So if you are interested in any of that stuff, or magic, or life, or fitness, or whatever, and you would be interested in signing up for a one-on-one, please go over to the website and purchase that. You just go to shop/shop, and you'll see it's actually the first item there for purchase is a one-on-one session. So I would greatly, greatly appreciate that if you guys are interested. I also want to say that you can expect, I have had multiple people reach out in interest in regards to a book club. So what I am thinking of in regards to a book club is I either take a chapter out of a book, or so many pages, or find an article, an academic article, or something that I think is really interesting to read. And it will be the next option for the book club. So you go to the website, you purchase for $5. Say it's, again, this is theoretical. We haven't made one yet, but say you go to the website and it's May 12th or something. You click on it, you purchase it, you'll get the PDF of the reading, and then I will send you out the day of the meeting on May 12th a Zoom link. And whoever signs up will all be in a Zoom meeting together to go over that reading. So we can basically have a roundtable discussion on whatever topic, whatever we read, and we can get back and forth. So it's not me leading it. I mean, maybe I'll lead it in regards to if people get out of hand, muting people, but it's just what you're paying for is the opportunity to be in a space for 2 to 3 hours with men and women who actually have read whatever we just decided to read, are interested in those topics, and want to share each other's ideas. So if that's something you'd be interested in, keep your eye out for that. I hope to have that going in the next couple weeks. Probably in the next week or so, I hope to decide on what reading and then schedule a date. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Also, please follow me on my other social media sites. So I have this Linktree link will take you to all these different sites. Follow me over on Telegram. It seems like a lot of people are enjoying the Telegram. We got our own Telegram group. Also, I have my own Telegram page, so if you don't want to be in the group chat, which is fun, and I do recommend, you can just follow me over there. So all my streams, everything that I do gets posted to the Telegram, so you can have a direct access to that. That's really useful. So if you're on Telegram, please go over there. And as Jimmy just posted, if you feel compelled, you want to support, I would greatly, greatly appreciate that today. Please use the Streamlabs link if you prefer. If you prefer to use YouTube, that is fine as well. But if you can, use the Streamlabs link. They don't take a much of a cut out of it, so I would greatly appreciate that. All right. So I think that basically concludes what I wanted to say in regards to some of the housekeeping. So if you're interested in a one-on-one, guys, go to the website and sign up. Would absolutely love to meet you and talk about whatever topics you're interested in. So the first thing that I want to do as we get in today's stream is actually talk, again, I like to root these things into Scripture. And so I want to root it in regards to, obviously the title of today's stream is The Baby Boomer Blindness and the Generational Pursuit of Happiness. Obviously what I'm insinuating there is the pursuit of happiness in and of itself as an end result leads people to being blind. And in fact, I think it leads people to worshiping themselves, of which, again, today's stream then ties nicely with the continuation of the New Age, with Alan Watts, with Christ consciousness, with all these different things. Nice continuation of that. It seems like the evil one is always getting us to fall into these traps where it's the original sin, where we worship ourselves. And by worshiping ourselves, we separate ourselves from God. And I think that separation, again, is the blindness that I'm trying to talk about. And I want to be careful because obviously there are plenty baby boomers that aren't blind, that are God-fearing people. They're probably your priests. They're at church. So again, we need nuance. We need some specific. These are just generalistic comments about a generation that I think are still accurate, even though you'll find plenty of exceptions. So don't email me that I said something and you try to come up with the one exception. I get it. There's exceptions to it all. I get that. But I think the pursuit of happiness as an end to itself leads people to be blind. And so when we look at even the progressive left right now, I think that might be one of the biggest differences is the hedonism, is what is the ultimate goal of life. You know, they might say some abstract thing like justice or something. Again, their worldview doesn't even account for an objective justice, but you can leave that alone. That's another stream. But generally, it's some type of happiness, right? Everybody deserves a house because that would, so that is their human right. Keep them happy. Everybody deserves health care. Everybody deserves a smartphone. Everybody deserves something. And you see the general movement of the progressive leftist political is to provide this happiness for people, which ultimately is the trap, right? This is the cheese on the mouse trap. It's happiness. Because as men especially, we get our happiness by fulfilling our duty, by fulfilling our potential, by fulfilling our role in society, by actually sacrificing ourselves to something bigger. That's why you want to know one of the happiest people in the world is probably a man who's getting ready to die for a cause that he fully believes in. He's way happier. He's getting ready to self-sacrifice his own life. That is a man in pursuit of his own, that's not necessarily in the pursuit of happiness per se, but it's in the pursuit of meaning. It's in the pursuit of things deeper than fleeting happiness. And does Christ ever call us to be happy, right? That come follow me and be happy. Come follow me and be merry. That we will laugh and giggle and do all fun things for the rest of the day, for the rest of it. No, of course not. He calls us to carry our cross. And so that's what I want to read a section to you now. I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 16, verse 21 through 28. 21 through 28. And this is where Christ commands those who want to follow him to pick up their cross. And then I want to read the footnote, and that then will set the context for today's conversation. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised the third day. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, quote, "Far be it from you, Lord. This shall not happen to you," unquote. But he turned and said to Peter, quote, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever dies to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. Assuredly, I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." And so, what does the footnote say in regards to this section? It says, "The cross, a dreaded instrument of Roman punishment, is also a symbol of suffering by Christians in imitation of Christ. We practice self-denial for the sake of the love of God and the gospel. Accepting the suffering is not a punishment, nor is it an end in itself." Right? So the dialectic, happiness and suffering, neither one is an end in itself. We're not into the dialectic stuff. "But a means to overcome the fallen world for the sake of the kingdom and to crucify the flesh with its passions and desires." The central paradox of Christian living is that in grasping for temporal things, we lose the eternal. But in sacrificing everything in this world, we gain eternal riches that are unimaginable. So that is the framework that I want to begin our conversation from, is that we as Christians are called to experience suffering, to accept our suffering, because it's our suffering that allows us to elevate ourselves above the fallenness of the world. And so when we look at the baby boomers, what is some of the more drastic things that occurred culturally in their generation? The number one is the 1960s countercultural revolution. And what is that? Well, the countercultural revolution is a mixture of things, and we'll get into the feminism, the second wave feminism. We'll get into the influence of Eastern mysticism, even the Frankfurt School. But the 1960s counterculture was not interested in suffering. In fact, it was interested in the destruction. So the dialectic in America at that time was the hegemony of Christianity. We're talking about that idyllic Leave It to Beaver's 1950s lifestyle. And at the time, these children are growing up with immense prosperity. The baby boomers didn't have the cultural suffering like the Great Depression their parents did, which then would allow them to appreciate the things in which they actually have. The baby boomers were the first generation to grow up with toys at a commodified level, meaning like the mass marketing of toys. The baby boomers were the first generation. The experience of television, the baby boomers were the first generation. So the silent generation, wanting to do the best that they could, obviously wanted the best for their children. But in so doing, again, telling them to go pursue happiness, we see the increase of women in the workforce in the whole, and I'm going to get into this later, the Miss Independent Woman. This whole mind frame is tied again to happiness. That a woman doesn't want, and this is through second wave feminism and this type of ideology, that a woman doesn't want to be dependent on a man because that isn't going to make her fully happy, right? When really it's the family. And so you see, as we get into some of the statistics, the family in the 1970s absolutely starts to erode. You won't believe the divorce rates. You won't believe the transition from the 50s and 60s to the 70s and 80s. Night and day difference. Why aren't the baby boomers staying in relationships like their parents? And again, I say the answer is happiness. It's the pursuit of happiness as an end in itself, of which then, as we talked about with highlighting John Pro and Kevin Samuels, is the modern women then. They are the continuation of that boomer spirit. That the Gen Xers and then the millennial women, this is boomer 2.0, this is boomer 3.0, in regards to the mentality, in regards to so many of the societal presuppositions that emerge, that we, as much as we want to point the fingers, and rightfully so, to a certain degree at the baby boomers, we're also caught up in the same web that they can't see out. We're, in a sense, as blind as they are because of the net around our culture and society. I mean, we're interacting through these technologies here, which again alter our sense ratios. There's things that we're missing because we grew up on computers and television and smart pads, iPhones, all this different stuff. So it's unfortunate. The first TV generation. I want to play a couple things from Marshall McLuhan here in a second to get going in that sect. And so we'll unpack then the whole repercussions of them being the first TV generation. And how, again, obviously you're already making the connections. First TV generation, the pursuit of happiness. How does an advertiser market a good to you? Well, obviously happiness, self-fulfillment, these things are crucial. And so baby boomers grew up with the television. They grew up being sold happiness, of which we are also consumers of. We are also products of. But I think one of the biggest difference between millennials and the Gen Zers and the Gen Xers and the boomers is the realization that the institutions are not in our favor. The democratization of media by the internet, of which, again, millennials and the Gen Zers grew up with, gives us a different mentality in regards to acquiring information and opinions and different, that we don't go to Fox. Like Fox News has no authority in our world. But if you are a Gen Xer, if you are a baby boomer, institutions have authority. They cannot see out of that. So that's why then they can talk about election, the presidential election of 2020, be all upset with the Republicans, and then still turn on Fox News and still watch the same programs and still deal with the same things over and over and over. Because they can't, I think as a generational programming, they can't differentiate authority from institutions. They're one and the same thing for them. They're one and the same thing. And that's then why when we look at BLM and we look at the corporate, the Fortune 500 companies and how they're pushing a progressive, they are so politically involved in our country that for the boomers, they've been being led by the corporations for a long time. That again, that NPC mentality, the programming, the Agent Smith, the one who's the same person at scale over and over and over. This is what television creates. And television does that to us too. But television depersonalizes people. And again, this is the same thing as I talked about with the New Age, with the cosmic Christ, with the spiritual boundary. It's this idea that somehow to be fully who I am, I have to lose my uniqueness. Now, obviously, boomers and people who watch television aren't consciously doing that, but they're consuming propaganda. They're consuming lies. And so again, that ties back into my previous stream on the unwitting agents of the evil one, is that by us believing in lies, we displace Christ within ourselves. We have to, because those things can't exist in congruence. The light of Christ, the who of truth, can't be in the presence of falsity. And so as we believe lies, as we watch propaganda, as we believe liars. We actually are taking it's Agent Smith sticking his hand into your chest, and the code is spreading throughout your body because you are now becoming Agent Smith. You are becoming institutionalized. You're becoming one with the Matrix. And I think, again, them being the first TV generation, I think, is the crux of so much of this stuff. So let's then just continue on and get into this whole TV thing. Because I think it's really interesting. So let me pull up this video and play it real quick of McLuhan. So check this out. This is, I got a few things of McLuhan I want to play. The first one, these real quick, these are only 30-second clips of him talking about the corporate drone. This is the depersonalization of TV and its consequences. So check this out real quick.
One of the effects of television is to remove people's private identity. They become corporate, peer group people just by watching it. They lose interest in being individual, private individuals. And so this is...
Okay, hold on. Looks like the audio is not working. Give me 1 second here. Let me do this. Looks like the audio is not playing through the screen like I thought it would. So let me just do this real quick.
Well, one of the effects of television is to remove people's private identity. They become corporate, peer group people just by watching it. They lose interest in being individual, private individuals. And so this is one of the hidden and perhaps insidious effects of television.
Well, it looks like we are lagging a bit on my end. I'm not sure why. It's playing fine in the screen, but when it flips over to the stream, it's like lagging way behind. But anyways, here's the other one I wanted to mention in regards to television and addiction. Check this out.
It was tried. Remember, a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, they actually paid people not to watch TV for a few months.
I don't recall that, but I'm sure
it was in Germany. It was in Germany. It was in the UK, and they discovered they had all the withdrawal symptoms of drug addicts, and very uncomfortable. All the trauma of withdrawal symptoms. TV is a very, very involving medium. And it is a form of inner trip.
So I love that when he says that it's a form of inner trip, right? Because we can imagine the culture of the 1960s and the baby boom in regards to hallucinogens and psychedelics and traveling and world religions and all this different stuff. So I want to continue. There's another clip, but it seems like the internet's lagging a bit here for me, so we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. I'll just unpack it myself. So McLuhan talks about the television and how it begins to tribalize man. And if you guys are familiar, I did a whole stream on Marsh McLuhan. He's very interesting. He's known as the sort of technology prophet. He envisioned a lot of different things before their time. One of the things that he was very much interested in is that the medium is the message, that the ways in which we consume information is more important than the information we consume. So let me say that again. The ways in which we consume information, newspaper, television, radio, reading, manuscript, is more important than the information we're actually consuming. And so he talks about how television and the electronic age began to tribalize man, that man began to move back to a more primitive state based on what he called the sense ratios, our sensory ratios, the senses in which we use to acquire information. How do we come to know our environments in the world? We use our senses, but our sense ratios can actually be altered. They're actually on a scale. And so he argued that literate man was a unique historical person, that from the tribal setting to even some of the previous languages, that the alphabet was a absolutely unique process in world history, and that it caused all these new understandings about individuals becoming more self-conscientious, and I don't mean individuals in the post-enlightenment, just singular persons become much more conscientious of themselves in the light of literacy. And he was referring back to the Greek alphabet. And so who is the Alpha and the Omega? The beginning and the end of the alphabet. The beginning and the end of creation. It's the Logos. It's Jesus Christ. And McLuhan talked about how the spread of the word, again, he wasn't using a theological context, even though he was a Catholic. He was talking about how literacy was dramatic and that Christianity spread itself through literacy. And in fact, as Christians, we're called to read God's word. And so it's interesting that as a Christian context, that the whole Logos theology is also tied to a sort of literate society, and that the Hebrews moving from a more of a sort of pictorial, I'm not saying that it is, obviously Hebrew is not, if you're familiar with it, but it has more of a pictorial dimension than a typical alphabetic language, like Greek or English or any of the Romance language. A traditional alphabet, or like Latin, it's not exactly the same thing. And so McLuhan talked about how the Greek alphabet and then the languages that spread from that were influential in world history, in the changing of our sense ratios, our understandings of logic, our understandings of the world, our understandings of ourselves, building communities, building cities, diving deeper into mathematics and all this stuff, because he would argue, again, that these alphabets and the societies that, I would connect it. He wouldn't argue, but hearing his ideas, I would connect that then to what we've talked about with Jacques Derrida, the French intellectual of the 1960s, of the deconstructionist school, the father of deconstructionism, and how he talked about foul logocentrism was the presupposition that Jacques Derrida said we have to undercut in the countercultural revolution. Jacques Derrida was an intellectual that was in promotion of the 1960s counterculture. And he wanted to undercut what he called the foul logocentrism of Western civilization, of Christendom. Foul logocentrism, the privileging of the sort of masculine principle, and then the presupposition of logos, which he talked about had all these different consequences, which he was against, like objective truth, like language can actually reflect objective reality, that they're tied together. Again, we believe this because God spoke the world into existence. Language and creation are intimately tied in a sort of mysterious theological way. We agree with that as Christians. You talk to a random Wicca or a magician or a shaman or some wizard, they're also going to believe the same thing. Now, they're going to have a different understanding of how they're going to use that, but this idea that somehow language, man's power is somehow in his language. And so McLuhan said that the TV began to reverse all those things that literacy did to man. All the privileges or the sense ratios. Again, I would be more in favor of the literate man. He would say that the television began to alter, and that the television began to move us into what he called an auditory sense ratio. That when we were literate people, what dominated was our eyes. Again, so what does Christ do? He gives you vision. Christ takes away your blindness. Christ spits in the mud, in the dirt, and rubs the spittle in your sockets. And where eyeballs never existed, now they're there, newly made. And you can see the world like you should. But as we moved away from literacy, as we moved away, again, the ways in which we actually spread Christ around the world, and we moved into the technological age, beginning with electronic radio, but he would say really more specifically it's the television. That the television began to take us from a visual-dominated sensory ratio that he would say literacy provides. When you're a literate man, your visual sense, or your visual sense is your dominant sense. But as you become more tribalized, your dominant sense becomes your auditory sense, becomes your ears. And in that setting, you're the center of the world. If your dominant sense is your eyes, there's a sense of objectivity because we're looking out at something and we're all doing it. But when our dominant sense becomes our ears, if you look in a room where sound, like a sound wave, you're in the middle of the sound wave. You're in the middle of your information processes. You're in the center of the world. The world actually revolves around you in an auditory framework. So I'm tying then McLuhan's ideas with the pursuit of happiness as an end, which I say is also tied to a sort of self-worship at an unconscious level, because somehow your happiness takes ultimate privilege over other things. Now, I'm sure, now this isn't radical, right? Not like the boomers or solipsistic or anything like that. I'm just trying to say that these are generational changes that I think are important. And so, as McLuhan said, the depersoning that the television does, that at the same time as you becoming the sort of center of your world because your auditory senses are now becoming dominant, and then he would even say that the world becomes a little bit more relative. The world becomes a little bit more subjective because your own interpretation begins to take a little bit more precedence as opposed to a literate society where the visual sense is dominant. So we then begin to lose our persons with the television. And then the programming is what becomes so, so important. And that's why the baby boomers, I think, were unfortunate in the sense that they were the first generation to be bombarded with programming, like literal mental programming, like literal abrasive programming to get people to buy things, to get people to change their values. You know, I saw one article for today, it made me roll my eyes, talking about how the CIA was wrote public letters about how upset they were with the counterculture in the 1960s. And anybody who's familiar knows that they're also propagating and promoting these ideas. So the TV is how we began to program the global man, right? As McLuhan talked about, the TV brings us into the global citizen, the global village. Well, how then the television programming becomes the program to the global man? That's how we program this depersoning of the individual to become the global citizen. And so, again, we still see it today with the CNN, the MSNBC, the Fox News. All the major media centers are programming to actually strip away what it is Christ would come to save. He's not going to come to save the person who believes all the lies. He's coming to save that little bit of truth, that little bit of authenticity that's still there. And all of us are engaging in the lies. All of us are engaging in sin. All of us are believing in things that we shouldn't believe in. So this is true for all of us, and even people who are repentful. And that's what's so difficult. Even good-hearted people that and yet they believe in such erroneous lies, and it shapes so much of their disposition towards everything. So the mental programming of the programming of the television is the mental programming of the tribal man, of the global citizen, right? And so then that television of the 1960s, that processing, that was like the domino that led, in a way, different causal, but that television was sort of the domino that led us towards the Great Reset. Because all the things that would allow us, the change in values, the sexual promiscuity, the destruction of the nuclear family, the abortion, the pursuit of happiness, women should get on the pill, right? This is the 1960s as well, and we'll talk about this. That as women get on the pill, they don't have children. Why do they not want to have children? So they can have more promiscuous sex. Why do they want more promiscuous sex? Because they can have more happiness. They can have more fun. They can be more fulfilled as individuals. But at the same time, what I'm saying is that pursuit of happiness to the nth degree actually takes away your personhood. So as they pursue their happiness in what we would call sinful manners eventually, I don't know how they would understand sin. Obviously, most of them probably weren't Christian, but they're losing their personhood. There's an exchange. The pursuit of happiness as an end in of itself is the exchange of your personhood. It's the exchange of the image of God that you're made in. Okay, so the next one then related to this TV is the rise of soap operas. What are soap operas? As I mentioned, the name soap operas comes from the fact that soap and detergent companies funded the production of soap operas, and that it was known that soap operas were known to push progressive social values from the beginning, all the way back to the late 1930s when they really got going. Now, there were radio programs and stuff like that, But when they got into the TV, again in the 60s, that's where I'm more focused on the soap operas. As when they moved from radio into television, that's, again, where the baby boomers were acquiring this stuff. The baby boomers were watching the television. The baby boomers, again, were the product of the programming. So what is the programming? The programming are soap operas. The programming are emotionally laden storylines that women, housewives, would watch that were deliberately pushing progressive social agendas that at large was not accepted, that their husbands probably were not in support of, and they would sell them products. So they would watch stuff that's altering their values in exchange for them to buy products that would become the commercial. And for these companies, the commercials were the main part of the program. You know, it wasn't... Obviously, it was changing the values and all this stuff. But you see how when I describe the soap operas, when I describe the progressive values, when I describe the opportunity for the corporations to market, we are living in the same world now. That's why it's like we can't hold all our fingers at the boomers. Go turn on a television. The progressive agendas, the interracial whatever, everything is... we're being bombarded with it still. It's the same processes. It's the same thing. We're all being boomerfied, right? That's the idea here. That's what I mean. It's like we're all sort of boomers to a degree. And that these commercials, these programs, that's really what they are. And Jay Dyer has done a great job talking about movies and even the boomers and some of the MK Ultra stuff in the 1960s. So then the TV then was also an instrument for the global stage. For the global stage. What do I mean by that? The global stage meaning Elvis, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, that these bands, right? This was novel at the time. This was a huge thing. You know, the Beatles and Elvis were kind of the first of their kind. And that the Beatles go on the Ed Sullivan Show, you know, with their shaggy hair, which at the time was socially countercultural, right? You know, guys are supposed to be clean cut your hair, dress nice. That they come out here with shaggy hair, doing all this stuff, playing their music, and the women go wild. And we also know, again, I'm sure Dyer could speak more eloquently to this, that the Beatles were an instrument of social control. The Beatles were being influenced to influence the people who listen to them. So the global stage, you see, the first generation, the environment that the TV creates depersonalizes the person. But also it's then filled with program that then programs the depersonalized person. And at the same time, the programming is also elevating the new global stage, because now it doesn't matter if you're in Iran, you're in China, you're in America, you're in Canada, you're in England, you're in Germany, you're in Brazil. It's the global stage. The television offers a single stage to the whole world. And therefore you can now get the whole world to see the world the same way, i.e. pandemic. But with the internet, obviously, that causes a little bit of, it makes things a little hairy because we can acquire information from so many different places. But the global stage was new. The phenomenon of the Beatles was unheard of, guys. It's never occurred before, that these young women would go to these concerts. They would throw themselves at the Beatles. They would stand out for hours. People would faint just at the sight of the Beatles. That they would pack ginormous auditoriums. This was never seen before. And really, again, this is tied to television. This is tied to social programming. This is tied to progressive cultural values. And so we see the exact same phenomenon in Cardi B. There's no difference, right? The difference is maybe the vulgarity that, you know, the Beatles, even in all their hippiness, never went as far as grinding with another woman and making out on live public television at the Grammys. But it's the same thing. It's the same phenomenon. It's the same phenomenon. We're being boomerfied like they are. But it controls the hive mind. That this television access to the global stage helps control the hive mind. It can control the zeitgeist. And obviously this is a huge deal. This is why censorship is now so important to the leftist powers that be. They want to control the hive mind. And that, again, the boomers, we talk about the NPC meme, and the boomer was the first generation to be programmed to be an NPC. Now, again, not all boomers are. Many boomers aren't. Many boomers are because of the circumstances of history. But the controlling of the societal hive mind is why the boomer still cannot get away from the institutional authority, right? That I think so much depend, like the boomer never developed alternative media sources and stuff like that to the same degree, right? There is always the presupposition that your society wants best for you versus communist China, versus communist Russia, versus this nation over here, versus this country over there. But that's not the case. You and I know this. You and I know that our greatest enemy right now is our own government, right? Who cares? You know, China's doing a lot less to me right now than my own government is. And of course, people are becoming more aware with that in the Trump era and all this different stuff. But before Trump, even the younger people could see it to a degree. The boomers couldn't see it. And so Trump then, as a boomer phenomenon, is a boomer who he himself, again, and I don't know, because I'm sure some people would say, well, he was faux opposition, that he was part of the, okay, maybe so. But here's another take, just throwing it out there, that Trump is also a boomer, and that him being a boomer and being naive to the fact that the government would also spy on him in his political campaign, that he is the boomer sort of awakening to all this stuff, right? So as my parents and your parents and all the different boomers in America are watching what's going on in the country, and we see Donald Trump, or was in the office, he is a boomer with the same presuppositions as they do, right? He watches his Fox News. He still reads, he cares what New York Times has to say. Like, all, again, institutional authority. Institutional authority. They still care about that. Where we know it's gone. We know it's against us. We are now more interested in building something new than being a part of what they've already built or correcting what they've already built, when we know what they've already built was for what it is now. This is where it was supposed to go. So Trump, being the boomer, is the boomer that is inside the awareness, that is witnessing the whole authoritative structure eating him. And so then my parents or your parents or other baby boomers see that, and they become aware of it along with Trump. But again, if you're still America first, if you're still a traditional Christian, you're still upset with Donald Trump because he doesn't go far enough. And that's that generational difference, right? That the boomers love Trump because that's as far as they'll go. Again, due to the programming of watching main media sources. That even in their boomer conservatism, it's still only to the limits of the perceptible conservatism that the media will give you, that Fox News will give you. That's as far to the right as they will go. And I think that's all due to the presupposition of the control or of the institutional authority on television, which then gives them a faux hive mind that they're all accessing the same sort of centralized ideas, concepts, language that keeps them collective in a way. So the global stage, the television was also instrumental for civil rights. So when we look at the boomer and the 1960s civil rights, now I'm in favor, obviously, God created all people. There should be no, I'm against racism in any regards that supports one group being supremacist over another group, right? As a Christian, you can't believe that. You can have in-group preference. You can say, I am a African Kenyan man and I want an African Kenyan woman. I am a French man and I want a French woman to have children with. I'm a Caucasian American man and I want a Caucasian woman to have children with. That's fine. That's in-group preference. That's okay. All groups are like that. Every group is 80% more in-group preference. That's fine. That's not racism. Racism is obviously the supremacy. So the way that television was used in the 1960s for the Vietnam War, for civil rights, for the 1960s counterculture, is that the TV was also used in the same way that it's being used by the media now for the BLM riots. Now, I would say the contexts were a little bit different. Obviously, that I would say there was more claims to be made for injustice, obviously for blacks back then than there are now. But what did they see with the television? It's not advantageous to televise the war. So as they televised the war, the baby boomers grew in opposition to the Vietnam War, which lasted all throughout the 60s and then until much later. But they were in opposition to the war. And so quickly, the country, the federal authorities realized, okay, well, we don't want to televise war because that actually does the opposite. But what we can do is televise the civil rights. We can televise public protests. We can televise public riots. We can televise the 1960s counterculture. We can televise Woodstock. We can televise, again, things to put it into the collective hive mind. We can televise things to move people on the global stage. And again, think about the moon landing, televised to the baby boomer. Again, think about that radical programming. Again, I know many of us may have skeptical opinions about the moon landing for various reasons, but you're not going to come across too many baby boomers that are going to have those same opinions. Why? Because of the attitude tied to the institutional authority. That came through the television tube. NASA said it happened. The government said it happened. Kennedy said we're going to do it, and therefore then it re-enlivens the America versus because they're in the Cold War at the time. But you can see the moon landing. You can see how Hollywood has been used. That the baby boomers were the first generation subjected to all of that. But in the name of the moon landing, what else is there to do? Again, you can see how these events also lead to the general global message to pursue your own happiness, right? Okay, now you're in the 1960 counterculture. What's the point? Why are you there? Well, the hegemony of traditional Christian ideas has limited my opportunities to explore the world. Eastern mysticism, sexual revolution, second wave feminism, all this different stuff. This is what me as a countercultural 1960s woman, I'm interested in those things. I'm interested in the pursuit of my happiness. That's ultimately what those things lead to. And so Hollywood, right? So what is the messages of the movies? And again, and plus the moon landing, also think about this. When you see the moon landing happen, what would your takeaways be as a modern human? Would it be, unless you're a Christian, maybe glory to God, some type of reverence to the Creator for all this stuff? But for most people, it deepened their humanistic yearnings of humanism, the worship of man, because based on that, man could goes from this planet to the moon in basically 2 years after the President Kennedy said we're going to do it. So that perpetuates, again, a sort of overvalorization of man, which leads to an ethics of what you're supposed to do with pursue one's happiness, pursue one's goals, pursue one's personal ends. And so now I want to transition the conversation. Actually, let's stop and take a break here, and I want to highlight like a really interesting article by the Pew Research Center. So I mentioned that the Pew Research Center is kind of the go-to place for statistical analysis data in the United States, really North America, but really all over the world. But the Pew Research Center does pretty quality work and is not politically laden like some of the other research centers, I'll say that. But here's one of the articles that I found that I thought was really, really interesting, right? Based on everything that I'm saying, that the baby boomers also grew up with the greatest amount of generational wealth, right? The most prosperous time, the idyllic time in American history was the 1950s. That's when they grew up. And yet, with the most financial opportunities, with the most opportunities to own, with the most stock investments, They're the gloomiest generation. They're the most unhappy generation. And again, you can't help but think, from my opinion, they're the most unhappy because that's the only thing they've been, or for many of them, that's what they've been pursuing, is happiness. In that the other generations who don't have those same comforts, actually, for example, us millennials and Zers, we can't own anything. We're basically in servitude. They put us in debt, and they make sure that we're not going to be able to make enough money to get out of it and to own anything, because that's the Great Reset. That's the global reset. And the boomers were, again, the sort of last privileged generation to have all the things that their ancestors built for them, right? Their parents and their grandparents and the people before them built up that prosperity in America that then the boomers ended up, and it's not just the boomers too. I mean, the politicians were behind that too, just like the politicians are behind it now, and they don't have my interest. So I also don't want to blame all the boomers or all Americans or all this different stuff for the things that happen politically, because we can see right now that a lot of stuff happens politically that historically they'd point the finger at us. Well, shoot, what can we do? We have no power right now unless we organize, which that's a naughty word right now on the internet. So anyways, this article talked about the baby boomers, the gloomiest generation. America's baby boomers are in a collective funk. Members of the large generation born from 1946 to 1964 are more downbeat about their lives than are adults who are younger or older, according to a new Pew Research Center Social and Demographic Trends survey. Not only do boomers give their overall quality of life a lower rating than adults in other generations, they also are more likely to worry about their incomes won't keep up with inflation. This despite the fact that boomers enjoy the highest incomes of any age group. So, again, just highlight, I'm not going to read this whole article to you guys. You guys can check it out. It's called The Baby Boomers, the Gloomiest Generation. It's on the Pew Research Center website. But right there, isn't that so interesting? That out of all the generations, the adult baby boomers were the gloomiest, the most unhappy. They were also the most worried about their own wealth. Meanwhile, they are the wealthiest generation. I think that ties with my general thesis of the pursuit of happiness. These gloomy assessments come from a generation that always has been identified with youth, witness to the resilience of the label baby boomers, but that's not well into and even beyond middle age. Boomers turned 44 to 26 this year, so this was in 2008, this survey. However, by no means certain that the boomers' current bleak mood is a function of their current stage of life. When it comes to quality of life assessments, data suggests that boomers generally have been downbeat compared with other age groups for the past 2 decades, starting back when some were still in their 20s. So their current sour ratings may be related to getting older, but they may be related to the attitudes and expectations about life they formed when they were young. And that's as much as I want to read about this article, right? That the baby boomers literally had so much prosperity that one of the potential arguments for this article was that they had so much prosperity that they envisioned having more than what they have now. And that's why them as a generation for the last 2 decades have been more unhappy and more gloomy than any other generation. Meanwhile, you and me own nothing. If we're lucky to get a decent job that we can actually save enough money to own something, we are rare in our generation. Meanwhile, they could go buy a house when they were 25 years old because they worked for 4 years or 5 years or 2 years, whatever they could go work a summer job and put themselves through college. And then they tell you to do the same when me working for a summer doesn't even pay for half a semester, let alone pay for all my college. You got to be kidding me. And so there is a disconnect there, absolutely. The cultural transition part, I think, is really interesting. And this was the next section that I wanted to get into, is the cultural transition. What points mark specific markings from the way that the silent generation, from the way that you and I, as traditional Christians, want to live our lives and promote values, how the baby boomers flipped them. They flipped them. And so the first I want to get into is the feminization and the emasculinization, right? that one of the things that I thought I was seeing and reading, and so you can check me and you guys can correct me if you disagree, is the masculinization and obviously the feminism. But I was trying to think about the forms of masculinity, right? I was trying to think the real masculine guy from the silent generation, the post-World War II soldier, and then thinking about somebody that would typify the sort of baby boomer. Well, that'd be a hippie. And so here I want to read a little bit of something on the hippies and then see if maybe they're also moving in a feminized position. So the youthful proponents of counterculture were known as hippies, and they disapproved of the modern world so much that they sought refuge in communes and mystical religions. During the 1960s and 70s, large groups of them could be found in any major European or American city. Male hippies wore long hair and grew beards, while female hippies eschewed anything that women traditionally wore to make themselves attractive, such as any makeup or bras. Right? So again, we see the same sentiment in modern feminism. I know when I was in Berkeley, multiple PhD students who were women didn't shave their legs, didn't shave their armpits, and didn't wear body odor or body deodorant. So you can imagine what that was like. But basically the sort of same sentiment. Hippies, and I wanted to mention, again, think of the men here. So the average man, the hippie, he's going to get deeper into the passions, deeper into sinful activity, deeper into, again, this hedonistic pursuit of happiness. And I would say all these things actually begin to feminize a person. They really do begin to feminize somebody. So hippies were iconoclast to varying degrees and rejected the traditional work ethic. They preferred love to money and feelings to facts and natural things to manufactured things. I can't help but, again, you think of the modern progressive, but even when they say natural things, our modern progressives are eating Impossible burgers and taking mRNA stabbies. So, regards to natural things, it's like now you're like you're a weird conspiracy theorist Christian if you don't want your stabbies or you don't want your children to have them. I don't know. I'm rambling. They engaged in casual sex and used various hallucinogens. They were generally pacifist and pessimist, both of which I think are feminine characteristics. To be pacifist and to be pessimistic or sort of I don't know, this sort of bitchy attitude I always associate with a sort of pessimism. Anyways, many disliked politics and activism. So again, we're supposed to be, as men, we're supposed to be the active principle. These hippie men, they are the passive recipient. Remember when I talked about in the last one in regards to the rat utopia experiment, how the beta males, once they reached that critical mass, they became absolutely passive to aggression to the dominant alpha males. Many disliked politics and activism, though they were influenced by the political atmosphere at the time. A significant cultural event of this era was the Woodstock Festival in August of 1969, which drew huge crowds despite bad weather and a general lack of facilities. Although it is commonly asserted that some 500,000 people attended, the actual figure is difficult to determine, even with aerial photography, as crowd experts would attest. The so-called hippie trial probably started in the mid-1950s as expeditions of wealthy tourists and students traveling in small groups. They started from the United Kingdom, heading eastwards, and as Western European economies grew, so did demand for international travel. Many bus services sprang up in to serve tourists. The first hippies, initially used to refer to men with long hair, joined the trial in the late 1960s. Many young people were beguiled by Eastern religions and mysticism, and they wanted to visit Asia to learn more. Others wanted to escape the conventional lifestyles of their home countries and saw opportunities for profit. Some smoked marijuana and wished to visit the Middle East and South Asia, where they favored products came from, where their favorite products came from. But air travel was in its infancy at the time in history and was beyond the reach for most. So anyways, the general hippie I would say this was a sort of emasculinized process. Even the smoking of marijuana, we typically smoke the female plant, and so I've saw a few things regarding testosterone and how it can potentially, again, this is still early research, but that the ingestion of the female plant, that too much of it may actually begin to lower one's testosterone rates in their testes. And so too much marijuana smoke may actually lower one's testosterone rates, which then is really interesting when you think about the how lethargic some people can get from doing it too frequently, where it becomes a lifestyle and they're not active, right? Because that masculine, that testosterone, you're supposed to want to like go out into the world and do something. That phallic, right? You're supposed to erect yourself into the world. And so if you are laying and you're passive, you're not going to have that same vitality. Another thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about, you're going to love this, is like birth control, for example, in 1960. So in the United States, the FDA in May of 1960 approved the first contraceptive pill, colloquially called the pill, a drug that has had a huge impact on the nation's history. Yeah, it sure has. Political attitudes towards human sexuality altered dramatically in the late 1960s because of young people. Although the behavior of most Americans did not change overnight, and here too mainstream beliefs on issues such as premarital sex, birth control, abortion, homosexuality, and pornography were openly challenged and no longer considered automatically valid. Individuals no longer feared social consequences when they expressed deviant ideas. The causes of this sexual revolution were manifold. More reliable methods of contraception and antibiotics capable of curing various venereal diseases and limited two leading arguments against extramarital sex. So the birth control and then pills for gonorrhea and syphilis, basically that is what really, that was the scientific foundation or the pharmaceutical basis for the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution wasn't just this totally natural thing. Okay, it was the pharmaceutical companies in conglomerates with them. And you know, but guys, you have listened to Dyer, you've listened to this stuff. You know that the elites already wanted to lower population, global population by then. You know that they were already interested in these things. You know that finding ways to limit births in the world wouldn't have been ridiculous for them to consider. And then the sexual revolution, again, that is the trick of the devil, right? Getting us hooked on some type of sinful addiction. Can be sex, obviously. I mean, all of us, have deep, energetic desires for sex. That's our biology. We want to reproduce. So that pursuit of happiness, again, the boomers were told to pursue happiness. And then that pursuit of happiness, given that flourishing foundation, that prosperous state in America, they rejected everything that their parents did that actually got them to that prosperity in favor of everything that was opposite in the name of happiness. Sexual revolution and sexual promiscuity and premarital sex is one dimension of that, no doubt. No doubt at all. And so I also want to mention the second wave feminism stuff, that coupled with the sexual revolution was a new wave of feminism. As the relaxation of traditional values heightened women's awareness of what they might be able to change, competition in the job market led many to demand equal pay for equal work and government-funded daycare services. So what did they want? In the name of happiness, boomer women chose to put their children into daycare. And they demanded the government, which again, the government represents the displacement of the man. We can see that in the black family, right? As the government comes in with regards to any service to the nuclear family, that government and the man can't occupy the same space. So as the government comes in, the man is always pushed out of the family. So it's interesting, though, that the boomer women were lobbying for the government for more daycare. We want to, again, we are modern women. We want to get out there and make that money. We are Miss Independent. We are pursuing our happiness. We are having sex. We're on the pill. And you know what? I have this one kid, and I'm going to put his ass in daycare while I go make some money. Some groups, such as the National Organization for Women, equated women's rights and civil rights and copied the tactics of black activists. The Equal Rights Amendment changed the divorce laws, making them more favorable to women, and the legalization of abortion. Think about that. Again, but what could be the justification for the legalization of abortion and then the alteration of our marriage laws, which really changed the divorce rate? That's why women are so quick to go file a divorce. It all plays in their favor. A woman can be the issue in a relationship, go file for a divorce, and get half of that man's life work. And he has no say. And she'll get the kids, and she'll get the house, and he'll have to keep working. He'll have to keep paying the bills, and he'll have to go somewhere else. Sorry, getting going on divorce. Anyways, but you can think about the change in the divorce laws and then the legalization of abortion. What type of havoc do you think that's going to wreak on the nuclear family, on traditional values? Again, all of which is in the pursuit of happiness. The personal is political became the motto of second wave feminism. But the feminist movement splintered because some became radicalized and thought that groups such as NOW, the National Organization for Women, were not enough. Such radical feminists, guys, this is in the 1960s, believe that people should start using gender-neutral language. Marriage should be abolished, and that the traditional family unit was a decadent, energy-absorbing, destructive, wasteful institution. They rejected heterosexuality as a matter of principle and attacked, quote, not just capitalism, but men. At the other extreme, staunch social conservatives launched major backlashes in regards to anti-abortion stuff. But think about that. That is exactly what we're dealing with young women now. Is that it's like the yearnings of the boomer, hippie, progressive, countercultural women of the 1960s. They said what they wanted. Now, they weren't going to get that radical a change that quickly, but that voice has been echoed in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, where the women now is that, right? That they want gender neutral language. They think marriage is patriarchal and should be abolished. That the traditional family unit was decadent and it's actually destructive and wasteful. And they reject heteronormativity. And they don't want to just attack capitalism, but men, because the patriarchy is tied to property and owning things and capital and all this. It goes back to the boomers, guys. That it's not new whatsoever. It's not new whatsoever. So that leads, then I want to continue this and move into the abortion. Abortion occurs, guys, in 1973 then. And I want to read you guys the section on the marriage and family, because this is disheartening right here. So we're talking about the 1960s. Now in 1970, so in Italy, divorce was legalized. It was illegal, right? The good Catholic nations, when they were still Catholic, divorce was illegal. Italy legalized divorce in 1970. Abortion went through at the same process in 1978. And so think of that. The whole Western world had access to, all women and all parties have access to abortion and divorce by the 1970s. Marriage in many Western countries became much less stable. Between 1970 and 1985, the number of divorces per 1,000 people in Denmark and Norway had tripled. I'm sorry. Let me try that again. Between 1970 and 1985, the number of divorces per 1,000 doubled in Denmark and Norway, and it tripled in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. In England and Wales, while there was only one divorce per 52 weddings in 1938, the number became one every two. This is a weird stiff. One every 2.2 50 years later. I don't even know what that is supposed to say. This trend accelerated into the 1960s. During the 1970s, Californian women visiting their doctors showed a marked decline in the desire for marriage and children. In all Western nations, the number of single-person households steadily rose. Think about that. So as wages decline, the ability for one worker, one man to provide for a whole family, as that goes downward, more people are living by themselves as opposed to living together, which makes it only difficult for everybody. In the major metropolitan areas, half the population lived alone. Meanwhile, the traditional nuclear family was in drastic decline. In Canada, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, West Germany, only a minority of households comprised of two parents and their children by the 1980s, down from half or more than half from just 1960. Within 20 years, the number of households that had both parents and their children dropped in half, sometimes more than half. In 20 years, guys. This is the pursuit of happiness. And this is the boomer blindness. Because think about the societal consequences of all this stuff. Think about the societal degradation. Think about the long-term effects on the children and then them acting those things out, them not getting divorced, them having children outside of wedlock, them just the whole thing. Look at our world now. That looking at the boomer blindness, which is also many of our own blindness and many of our contemporaries' blindness, it begins to make a lot more sense. That I think for some of us, we don't fully grasp the immense transition in Western values between 1960 to 1980. There is so much transition there that I think for many of us millennials, it's just we don't know history enough. We don't even know the history of our own countries enough. And if we did, we would be able to see some of the problems that exist in front of us a little bit clearer, I would suppose. In Sweden, such a family unit fell from 37% to 25% in the same period. In fact, more than half of all births in Sweden in the mid-1980s were from unmarried women. Let me say that again. This is by the 1980s, guys. This isn't the 21st century. In 1980, more than half of all Swedish births were from unmarried women. In the United States, the nuclear family fell from 44% of households in 1960 to 29% in 1980. But for blacks, that figure was higher. In 1991, single mothers had given birth to the majority of children. 70% of black kids were birthed to a single mother. Anyways, we don't even have to get into that. So, guys, you can see that these are serious consequences. And again, my argument is that the root of them is the pursuit of happiness, and how the pursuit of happiness blinds all of us as individuals, as a generation, as a nation. Because we can just take the boomer blindness and we can apply that to Western civilization blindness. Well, the Western blindness, the American blindness, it's all the same thing. It's that we are existing in a group of people all pursuing happiness as an end in of itself. And that tunnel vision towards happiness leads to the degradation of everything that is good, everything that is true, like the family. Again, what can be more important than the family, than the nuclear family? It's mind-blowing, guys. I hope I don't sound like a broken record. This stuff is just surprising to me. When I did it, I was like blown away by it. So you can see how all this stuff leads to the destruction of the nuclear family. Now I want to read about the dramatic drop in children real quick too. So here's talking more about divorce rates and stuff like that. Among Americans aged 50 and up, the divorce rate per 1,000 married persons went from 5. Think about this, guys. 5 couples out of 1,000 couples over the age of 50 were divorced in 1990. 1990. That went up, that doubled in 10 years as soon as we got into the 21st century. That among those in the 65 and higher group, tripled to 6 out of 6 per 1,000 marriages during the same period. Marriage instability in early adulthood contributed to their high rate of divorce. For comparison, the divorce rate for the same period of people aged 25 to 39 went from 30 down to 24, and those aged 40 to 49 increased from 18 to 21. According to American demographer Philip Longman, quote, even among baby boomers, those who wound up having children have turned out to be remarkably similar to their parents in their attitudes about family values, unquote. The post-war era, most returning servicemen looked forward to making a home and raising a family with their wives and lovers. And for many men, family life was the source of their fulfillment and a refuge from the stress of their lives and careers. Life in the late 1940s and 50s was centered around the family, and the family was centered around the children. Among French women born in the early 1960s, only a third had at least 3 children. Yet they were responsible for more than half of the next generation. Think about this. Because so many of their contemporaries had just 1 or even none at all. Among French women born in the 1960s, so baby boomer women, France, born in the 60s, 1/3 of all those women had 3 children or more. Those third of those women that had 3 children or more, they contributed to well over half of the next population of the next generation, because the other 2/3 of women only had 1 child, or a lot of them had no children at all. No children at all. So when we talk about the continuation of Western civilization or Christendom or our heritage or our language groups, I mean, our own women are contributing to it, our own selves, right? The fact that us men are not demanding those things out of our women too, right? We're just as guilty as a generation. Not saying that you, who's ever listening to this stream, but we men as a generation are also culpable for sure. For sure. So in the United States, 1/5 of women born in the 1950s ended their fertile years without giving birth. 17% of women from the baby boomer generation had only 1 child each and were responsible for only 8% of the next generation. On the other hand, 11% of baby boomer women gave birth to at least 4 children each, for a grand total of 1/4 of the millennial generation. Do you hear that? 11% of 11% of baby boomer women gave birth to 1/4 of the millennial population, the millennial generation. All of them came from 11% of baby boomer women. That's amazing. Those who had many children were likely religious, especially practicing Christians. Who would have guessed it? That the women who chose duty, family, responsibility, meaning over hedonism, pleasure, happiness, all these other things that have been offered to their generation through television, through media, through every form of propaganda, they're the ones that had more than that 4 children or more. While those who chose to remain childless were often members of the counterculture or were part of the feminist movement of the 1960s or the 1970s. Because parents wield a great deal of influence on their children, this will likely cause cultural, political, and social changes in the future. For example, by the early 2000s, it had already become apparent that mainstream American culture was shifting from secular individualism towards religiosity. I haven't heard that one, but anyways, so the destruction of the family, we see the increase in divorce, the abortion, the sexual revolution. I didn't even get into the Miss Independent woman that this is a big problem. So this mentality, so we've already just highlighted all these women who aren't getting married, they're not having children, right? Well, I would say this, and again, this is from things that I've listened to with Kevin Samuels, but this you hear these women call in this independent woman mentality that I don't need no man, that I'm going to work, I can take care of myself. That when we look at women and women that you want to build a family with, that they don't bring any of the traditional skills. So you go and you try to find a woman, and she wants you to make a certain amount of money. She wants you to basically be a traditional man. Most women still want a traditional man, but few women are a traditional woman. So it's like this Miss Independent Woman thing means basically you're getting a used car, right? Something that's been around the block with other people, that she can't cook and clean. She doesn't want to submit to you. That she wants like some type of domestic partnership. That heterosexual relationships with these independent women are basically homosexual relationships. It's there for sex, and then it's like a partner, right? It's like, well, I get my money, you get your money, you can have access to my body, and that makes me your wife. No, that's not it at all. And so the Miss Independent Woman is really a mentality that already prevents the traditional nuclear family. Because the traditional nuclear family is that my wife and I have to be on the same page. This idea of this competition or this self-reliance, this self-independence, it's one thing if they work. It's one thing if they do that's fine. That's fine. Again, if it's worked out in the right context. But I think for many women, the idea of submitting to a man, that a man leads the household, they don't want to do that. And they don't want to do that because they've been told that they are queens. The Miss Independent Woman, that you're a queen. You go out there and get yours. You don't have all that sex. Go make that money. And somehow women then think that then by getting a job and making money, that makes them more attractive to men. Men don't care about how much money you make. We want a woman, again, if I'm a traditional man who's looking for a wife, we want somebody who is traditional, has the same values, wants to be a wife, who's going to be a good mother, who's feminine, who's friendly. Like, you don't want to be with somebody who wants to debate all the time, who wants to argue. And so, again, that independent woman mentality, I think, breeds that sort of competitive feeling with what should be your spouse. But this only leads to the degradation of the nuclear family. This only leads to the destruction of the family, because women are, again, trying to be poor versions of a man. And because they think that their power is coming from being this, pulling their dick out, figuratively speaking, right? But just overly being confident, like just being too much of a man in front of people's, no man wants that. And that's not going to be a good mother, because that shows that you're not going to raise a good woman, a woman that another Christian man would actually want to be with. So the Miss Independent Woman thing, I think, is another aspect of the destruction of the family. And the fact that women then in the 1980s were so reticent to give or have the government provide daycare for their children. I'd rather go to work and put my kid in a daycare. Think about that. Again, you can only get there by a woman negating the natural responsibilities and feelings she has for her children, right? Like, she's so focused on her own happiness, on that money, on that goal, on that thing, that putting the child, which she knows deep down, no woman goes and drops their children off at a daycare and feels happy about that. I mean, unless you need a break, you're giving it to your mother, they're watching the kids. You know what I mean? That I think this whole overly dominant masculine persona for women has been bred in them, and that's been bred since the 1960s. And again, the women, look at our creation narrative. It's Eve that listens to the serpent. That women are so much more likely to listen to the world. They're so much more likely to fall victim to the machinations of the evil one, because their focus is on the world, because their focus should be on children and the family, which is always going to be in the world. Where the man, the woman, we should be back to back, right? So while she's looking at the family, I'm looking in the opposite direction, towards the future, towards God, towards our destination, towards potential predators, towards violence, towards whatever. And yeah, so I'll leave that there. That the Miss Independent Woman thing, I think this is a major detriment, again, to the nuclear family that we wouldn't readily think about. Right? We can think about abortion and divorce, but we don't think about the fact that women have a mentality where they think that, again, by them becoming men, that somehow we're going to want them. Like again, a man doesn't judge a woman based on her job and how much money. That's how a woman judges a man. Right? Can you be a provider? Can you be the leader of the household? All this stuff. And so they go and they get these jobs. They invest in these master's degrees. They go to this school. And then they expect you to want them because they have the things that they want in another man or something. I mean, it's crazy. So that Miss Independent Woman breeds women who can't do anything but take care of themselves. Right? They can't take care of children. They're not good with children. Most of them don't even want children. They're not nurturing. They're often not the nicest women in the world. Right? They're not friendly. Anyways, I'll leave that there. So the feminism has wreaked havoc, I would say, on women and their disposition towards even having a family. And then the dramatic drop in the number of children families have, it's terrible. And so this whole period can be characterized intellectually by a flip in traditional values, even towards Christianity. But when we look on the intellectual level, I mean, the Frankfurt School. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what the Frankfurt School is. But that got going again. That is a boomer. The boomers grew up through the Frankfurt School and the Frankfurt critical theory. So you guys know critical race theory, critical theory, all this different stuff. This comes from an academic school in Frankfurt, Germany called the Frankfurt School, right? And they promote as a school of social theory and critical philosophy associated with the Institute for Social Research. And basically, they were critical of capitalism and Marxist-Leninism philosophically as inflexible systems of social organization. And the school's critical theory research indicated alternative paths, right? Alternative paths. So the Frankfurt School, for if you guys don't know, I'll just say this real quick. The Frankfurt School's perspective on critical investigation is based on the Freudian, Marxian, Hegelian premises of idealist philosophy. And so they are very much into the Hegelian dialect, the young Hegelians, all this different stuff. So most people, if you're a traditional Christian-minded individual, you're probably not a fan of the Frankfurt Critical School, the Frankfurt School. So my only point in bringing that up is that the boomers lived through that. The boomers lived through the flip of the universities. Even though the universities still had traditional analytic stuff, they weren't so social justice warrior, progressive, postmodern stuff, that they lived through this sort of intellectual transition as well of all this stuff. So anyways, guys, that basically, let me make sure I did have one more thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, and that's the general overview of the differences between generations. So I found this little article I thought was kind of nice, and we're just going to talk about some of the different generations real quick to wrap up today's stream. So the boomer generation, what are the boomers? The boomers were born between 1946 and 1964. And the size is about 71.6 million people. So the baby boomers are the highest consumers of traditional media like television, radio, magazines, and newspapers. Despite being so traditional, 90% of baby boomers have a Facebook account. This generation has begun to adopt more technology in order to stay in touch with family members and reconnect with old friends. So this generation is experiencing the highest growth in... Oh, no, never mind. Okay, so the next one is Generation X. A few things about Generation X is they were born from 1965 to 1980, basically. And so anybody born from 1965 to 1980 is Generation X. And in regards to the media consumption for them, Gen X still reads newspapers, magazines, listens to radio, and watches TV. about 165 hours worth of TV a month. However, they are also digitally savvy and spend roughly 7 hours a week on Facebook, the highest of any generational cohort. I thought that was interesting that the Gen X are the largest consumers of Facebook. They're on Facebook more than anybody else, the Gen X. And that makes a little bit of sense because the Gen X has the sort of institutional reverence of authority, although they can differ, but a little bit more so than the millennials, right? That the Gen Xers still have a little bit of that boomer reverence for the institutional authority. They still watch the TV and the mainstream media and stuff, but they're also digitally sophisticated. They also have smartphones. They know how to use those and all this different stuff. So the Gen X really marks a sort of transition, also known as the MTV generation, you know, that channel that was supposed to play music but no longer does. Then we have what's called Generation Y, which is from 1980 to 1996. So this are Millennials or Generation Y. Millennials or Generation Y. And we occupy about 72.1 million people in the United States. And 95% still watch TV, but Netflix edges out traditional cable as the preferred provider. Cord cutting in favor of streaming services is the popular choice. This generation is extremely comfortable with mobile devices. About 32% will still use a computer for purchases. They typically have multiple social media accounts. Yeah, we definitely do. And then Gen Z, I just thought this was interesting. They are from 1996 to 2015. They're about 68 million. So they're the smallest of the generations in the U.S. right now. And the average Gen Zer received their first mobile phone at the age of 10.3 years old. Not wild. Gen Zers, on average, received their first smartphone at 10.3 years old. That's crazy to me. Many of them grew up playing with their parents' mobile phones or tablets. They have grown up in a hyper-connective world, and the smartphone is their preferred method of communication. On average, they spend 3 hours a day on their mobile device. Wow. So that was just a few little quick things. I was going to read that at the beginning, but I totally forgot. You know how I am, I got going and totally missed it. But anyways, that is going to conclude today's stream. I hope everybody enjoyed this conversation on the baby boomer blindness and the generational pursuit of happiness. I hope that it was insightful and it connected some dots. I know that I rambled quite a bit there. And so now let's see if we have any super chats real quick. Again, if you guys have any super chats, please feel free to send those in over on Streamlabs. If you can use my Streamlabs link, I would greatly appreciate that. They certainly don't take out as much as YouTube does. So if you guys could, please use the Streamlabs link. I will share that in the chat now. So if you guys could, if you guys want to send in a super chat, please use that Streamlabs link. We have one from Anna. She sends in $4.99. Thank you so much, Anna. She says, shekels to my boomer parents who gave me life. Glory to God. Exactly. My glory to God. Glory to my parents. My gosh, thank God for my boomer parents. I love my boomer parents. And it's funny because I think some of the stuff we talked about today, my parents were not progressives. My parents were not hippies. My parents were certainly on the right side of that cultural transition in the 60s and 70s. So they're both very traditional. But in regards to the institutional authority and TV, I mean, there's many similarities we can see generally with boomers that I don't think is that controversial. But thank you, Anna, for stopping in and watching the stream and supporting with $4.99. Thank you very, 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 very much. I greatly appreciate that. Again, Anna said, shekels to my boomer parents who gave me life. Glory to God. Looks like we have another one from BP. He super chatted and said, when enough parents put their children's health and happiness over God, a boomer generation is born. Those kids grow up and simply agree. Wow, that's a great comment. BP, thank you for the $5, brother. Thank you for the support and the contribution. Let me read that again. This is I like this comment. He said, BP said, when enough parents put their children's health and happiness over God, a boomer generation is born. These kids. Well, I would disagree with it. I don't think that it was the silent generation's fault per se. I think they experienced a lot of trauma going through the Great Depression and World War II, and they told their children to go pursue happiness. I think maybe right. So maybe you are right. I mean, that's probably incorrect. So I guess I kind of do. I guess I kind of do agree with your comment, BP. I just wasn't putting so much blame on the silent generation because I was trying to think about the whole context. Like if you were part of the silent generation, you experienced just the Industrial Revolution. Think about all the transition they witnessed. Like if you're in the silent generation, you existed before the Wright brothers. Like you saw a lot of change, and so now you have children post World War II, and you know. You can fault them, but you can also see where their heart was. So difficult times, difficult situation. But thank you, BP. Thank you very much, brother, for that $5. Nathaniel Hill threw in $19.99. Thank you so much, brother. Nathaniel, God bless you and your family, man. I hope you and your wife and the kids are doing well. Hope your mother's well and that your wife's family is doing well down in that great state. I will not say to maintain your anonymity of your location, but thank you so much, brother, for the $19.99. We got to talk soon. We got to catch up, man. We haven't spoken a while. We got to catch up. Theoria Zone, our good brother over on the islands. I'm not sure what island you're on in Hawaii. Maybe the Big Island. I'm not sure. You have to tell me which island you're on. But Theoria Zone, one of our good brothers here in the community, donated $5 and said, great stream. Keep doing God's work. Thanks. Well, thank you, Theoria Zone. I'm glad that you appreciated today's stream. I didn't know what I was going to stream on, and this topic it kept coming to the surface, and it's like, all right, fine. So I just spent a few hours diving in, doing research today on this topic. So I'm glad you liked it, Theoria Zone. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you very much for that $5. I greatly appreciate it. Again, thank you, Anna, for the $4.99. And Pano throws in $5 and said, love you, bro. Well, love you, Pano. Thank you so much, man. Happy Lent to you. I'm sure that you are singing during the various services, or maybe you are, maybe you're not. I'm not sure. But Pano, thank you, brother. We got to meet soon. We got to catch up soon and chat. I know that we'll see each other potentially in June, but yeah, maybe we'll have to schedule something. Maybe we can meet in Indianapolis, grab some dinner or something. Oh, well, they're still on lockdown. We'll figure something out. We need to get. I'll reach out to you privately, Pano. We need to talk. We need to do something. So, Kauai. Kauai is where Theoria Zone is. Jeez, lucky you, man. Lucky you. Must be nice living in paradise. Anyways, guys, that basically concludes today's stream. I want to thank everybody for the super chats and everyone for the support. Please also, if you guys are interested in doing a one-on-one, we are having a ton of fun doing one-on-one sessions. Let me know what you'd be interested in talking about. Go over to the website, click on, go to shop/shop. You'll see that the first option is a one-on-one session. Please sign up for that. Would love to do a one-on-one session with you guys if you're interested. Also, please, if you like what we're doing over here on the YouTube channel, sign up for the exclusive members only content. Go to davidpatrickharry.com/register and you can become a website member for $5 a month. I know some of you guys don't want to do that. I understand. But if you're in a position, you like what I'm doing, you think, man, that guy is consistent. He's always putting in his work, and you'd like to contribute, you'd like to show some appreciation, please become a website member. It's $5. I appreciate that. Plus, you get access to exclusive content if in the future you'd ever want to see it. I know some people are so darn busy. It's like, I don't have time to watch more content. Well, I understand that. But if you want to support, you could at least do that over at the website, and I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. So those are the last two things I want to say. Also, we got new merch over at the shop. And I know John Pro got some shirts. I know a few people got some shirts. My shirts are still coming in. Nobody has actually owned any of the new merch yet because we're still waiting on Shopify to send it out. So as soon as I get mine, then I'll wear it live and you'll be able to see some of the new stuff. But if you'd like to potentially see what's up there and maybe buy something yourself, go to davidpatrickcarey.com/shop and check out some of the new merch. Become a website member. And that really does it. I was wanting to stream again probably Friday because it looks like Thursday is going to be a busy day. I might be able to do Thursday evening. I'll be back either Thursday or Friday. I didn't know what I wanted to stream about. So I was trying to think of something. I know that this is Holy Week. You know, my boomer stream wasn't really themed around Holy Week, but I just feel like I just wanted to do this. I was thinking about, and you guys can let me know if you think this is a good idea or not. I was thinking about for the topic on Thursday or Friday is just reading the entire book of the Wisdom of Solomon. So many people have become chrismated or baptized in the Orthodox Church. Subdeacon Mark and what we did at my church for all the catechumens and the newly illuminated is, as tradition had, we would read the Wisdom of Solomon, an Old Testament text teaching the newly illumined about who Christ was. And so I was thinking, well, shoot, that might be a good one for Holy Week, is that I'll just sit here for probably 2.5, 3 hours and just read Wisdom of Solomon. I don't know. I got different ideas. If you guys have a stream topic, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always open to ideas, but it may be something else. I never know what I'm going to do, but I'll come up with something either Thursday or Friday. So I will see you all then. Thank you again, everyone, for the love and support. Thank you, everyone who supported tonight. Pano, Anna, Theoria Zone, Nathaniel Hill, and BP. Thank you guys so much for the support and reaching out. God bless everyone and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Enjoy your Holy Week, and I will see you next time, either Thursday or Friday. So as always, God bless.